girls can't be what they can't see. So we're creating authentic leaders within the sector. I never walked away and said, sorry, that's just the way it's always done. I would question things because the reality is we're not here for a long time. So why would we want to half do life? Why not be the best that we can? I think it's so important that we teach these girls at a young age that exactly as you are perfect.
Welcome to the Debunking Your Growth Mindset podcast with Sean McCambridge. In this podcast, we will unpack practical ways to help you grow and build on your current mindset and challenge old habits so you can see the potential that's within us all and learn how to get out of your own way.
We've got Tamika Smith joining us today, a really interesting and inspirational podcast. She covers some great aspects, including how some of the challenges early in life have really shaped and defined her journey from here, and she's really sought to turn them into a positive. How she's used self-awareness and reading of books and mentors to grow and develop as an individual, but also how she's uncovered some opportunities in a business context out of some problems or issues, and how she's utilised, I guess, her out-of-the-box thinking and entrepreneurial sort of drive to create businesses that really address those issues or problems. So it's a really insightful podcast. I've got no doubt there's some great takeaways, and I think you guys will really enjoy it. So if you really enjoy it and you get some value out of it, I'd encourage you guys to send it on to other people that may also get that benefit, and also to put it in a rating at some point in time as well. That'd be fantastic. So thanks for joining. Tamika, thanks so much for joining us here today. Really appreciate you taking the time to share your journey. Through my research and speaking to some people that know you, it's clear that you're a bit of a dynamo. You're a founder of two quickly growing businesses, which is no mean feat. Doing one at any given time's an amazing achievement, but two's incredible. You were the Gold Coast Businesswoman of the Year in 2017 and a finalist in 2018 for the Australian Construction Awards for Women in Construction. You're also a big participant and volunteer with children in foster care charities. So I guess I want to go back to the beginning. You know, you've got evidently an awful lot of entrepreneurial drive and spirit and energy. Where did this all come from? You know, where did it all begin?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I think a lot of that stemmed from early childhood trauma. At around 13 or 14, I was in a lot of situations that most people wouldn't normally go through in their entire lives. So I was faced with a lot of circumstances at a young age, which meant that I had to become quite decisive. I was also around a lot of people who didn't step up to be accountable to situations that were around. So very early on, I had to make the decision that I could either A, be a product of excuses, or B, be accountable and make the decisions that people around me were not prepared to make. I think the more executives you meet, Sean, the more self-aware ones that you meet, you realise that a lot of us are really trying to create a world that we didn't have, and that's exactly what I set out to do.
Yeah, and it seems like as a young individual to have that clarity around who you wanted to be, and equally, and maybe more importantly, who you didn't want to be at a young age was quite remarkable. So, I mean, how did you talk about self-awareness before, how did you as a young individual have that self-awareness to choose a different path to what was playing out, I guess, in the environment that you had at that point in time?
I think a lot of it was being confronted with what I didn't want. A lot of that was put in front of me to say, this is where you're going, and I protested that. I was always a child who would question why we had to do things, and then being faced with so many bad experiences at once at a young age, it really put in front of me that this is where you're going, this is where your life is, and this is where everyone around you is going to. So I put the brakes on quite firmly and said, no, that's not where my life's going. And when people around you aren't prepared to catch the ball and say, I've got this and I've got you, you have no choice but to either succumb to that and go, okay, well, I'm not happy with my life and I'll surrender to that, or I'll stand up, I'll make some decisions, and I will do what it takes to get to where I want to go. I had boards all over my walls. I would read so much because in my mind it was quite logical that if I just followed this path, I would get to there. So, yeah, I made the decision probably at about 13, 14 that that's where I would go. And I think everyone sets out their career sailing the ship, and I had to explore all these new territories and go through a lot of storms, I guess, if you look at it that way. But when you find accomplishment and you overcome battles, you find meaning. And the only goal from that point onwards then is to step out of, steering the ship and become a lighthouse, which is all I really set out to do.
Well, it sounds like you made some powerful choices as a young lady. And what I like about all of that is you seem to have a fairly compelling vision of the future, where you wanted to go, what you wanted to achieve with your vision boards and whatnot. And I think that's obviously been a big motivator for you. But talking about vision, talk to us a little bit about the two businesses you founded and how did they come about?
Sure. Well, TSR Property Solutions was founded. I was with Metricon Homes for about 8 years of my career, and I found while I was there we were delivering a large piece in the pie, but I couldn't touch everything from a development point of view. So I set out to have more of an earlier intervention with my clients to be able to get in from the beginning. Because when I was at Metricon, I started to write lists for people as to what they should look for when purchasing a block of land to ensure that they could get the maximum results. So I basically jumped out and ran and thought, no, I can alleviate a really big problem here because I'm seeing so many people be screwed over, lose money. And they were the mum and dad developers, the ones who couldn't afford the project managers, the development managers. They didn't have the 5 or 10% fee up front to be able to fund that. So I started TSR about 3.5 years ago. And what we did, Sean, is that we had project management and development management fees built in by the builder. So the client wouldn't have the upfront cash flow issues that most developers have, and they could get the surety around their projects being overseen by an expert in the industry. So that's how TSR started, and that was very much walking the path, dealing with builders, dealing with being the underdog, being a young woman in the industry and pushing boundaries that hadn't been pushed before. And to be honest, the work was rather easy. It was the environment and the culture that was quite difficult in being in construction. So similar to my childhood, I think many people turned to me and said, look, Tamika, that's just the way it is. And to be honest, that wasn't good enough for me. That wasn't, I wasn't someone that was going to continue to sit back and accept that's the way things were done. So after winning the Young Businesswoman of the Year, I decided to leverage the attention I was getting into women within the sector and give them a platform to speak. So that's how the top 100 women come about. Initially, I'd set out to feature 100 women over a 12-month period, and that just grew a lot quicker than what we could have expected, because for once, women within the sector had a place, had the microphone where they could be authentically themselves. They got to step out of the shadows of being who everyone expected them to be, and they got to be themselves. So within a 12-month period, we had 3,300 women in a community globally, with women in all aspects of construction and development. So I had to step back and make some decisions to go, what am I doing with this? Because clearly there's a big demand here. So we had people offering us money for events, and I didn't have the infrastructure because I was quite busy with TSR. But it's like most things, right? You have a set vision in your head of where you're going, but you need to step back at times to assess if that's the best way forward, or if you need to be a little bit more adaptable and flexible with where life's taking you. So decided to put a board of directors together for the top 100 just in December last year, and already in the last couple of months, that's building up quite well behind the scenes to become one of the fastest growing networks for women in construction and development around the world.
And just picking up on that, it seems like you've had the foresight to sort of get some of those structures or governance aspects in place to support the no doubt the ongoing growth. But what is the elevator pitch when you're sort of at a dinner party or whatnot, and people say, "Tell me, what is the vision or the reason why Top 100 Women exists?" What is the answer that you give?
That's a good question. I would say it's giving women the power to be themselves. You know, girls can't be what they can't see. So we're creating authentic leaders within the sector. We're approaching girls and saying we're creating a platform that offers transparency and accountability to the sector. If you look at those movements like Me Too and so forth, Sean, they created a hell of a lot of awareness in the world of this is not acceptable and we're not going to do things like this. And that actually pulls people into line subliminally. That makes people go, hang on, we're not going to do that because we're going to get called out on it. The Top 100 is very different to a typical women's group, though, because we're not there to hate men. And we're actually setting out to drive some real key solutions, not just awareness. Some of the things we're building behind the scenes is based on the problems that we've been given, which is we want to employ women, but we can't find them. Something we're building behind the scenes is a tender room exclusively to find women within the sector and connect them. So I think that's the biggest difference with this group as opposed to an awareness group. We're really setting out to go, we've got the problem and here's the solution.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, it certainly seems like you're shining a light on some of the talented individuals in that regard, but also, I guess enabling solutions to some of those problems out there as well, which I think that's really, really cool. I want to take a step back pre the companies, and a lot of the listeners will perhaps no doubt know one of the larger project builders across Australia in Metricon, and it's my understanding that you become the number one salesperson within that group, which is no doubt, not an easy feat. I guess if I was to sort of step outside your own head for a moment, and if I was to ask the leadership team at Metricon, what would they say if I was to ask them why Tamika was so successful in their environment? How would they sort of describe that?
It's funny, because with most entrepreneurs, they make people happy, but they also annoy people on the way because they have this vision that's a matter of get out of the road, I've got to get there.
Yep.
So look, I was quite lucky that one of the owners actually put me on when I was 19. So I jumped under his wing a little bit, and he very much guided me through a lot of things. But my intentions were always good. And that was very clear from the beginning that I pushed the boundaries. I had rules around me, but I would question them. Why is it done that way? If we just take 10 centimetres out of the house, I can get that to work for the client. But I was very much driven by meeting my client's needs. I never walked away and said, sorry, that's just the way it's always done. I would question things. I'd sit with the estimating department, the drafting department, contracts, and I needed to understand why that was done a certain way. You can see people show when they're thinking in a box, and it's like if it doesn't tick 5 out of the 5 boxes, it's no. It's just no. Someone like me would come in and go, but we can adapt that first box and make it a little bit better and it'll tick it. So I'd probably say, if I look at Jason, who put me on, he said to me when I started my own business, I knew you always would, because I had that persistence and that ability to question why. But like with most visionaries at a young age, you don't always have the self-awareness to communicate what you're trying to do. So I think that is something that entrepreneurs need to address, because often they can come across as rude, arrogant, and they're not. They're just trying to get to what they see in their mind, but they're not always able to articulate how that looks. So, yeah, look, I think it would definitely be a positive feedback, I hope, by all means. But I was the first woman to reach that, which was something that was really important to me, because when I started at 19, there wasn't many girls then, and now Metricon's got a great team, and they've got over 50% of women within their organisation across Australia, and a lot of millennials too, which says a lot about the culture that they're breeding.
Yeah, no, well, I think fantastic outcome there for Metricon. Obviously, you achieved some great things there, and I guess I just sort of want to leverage that answer a little bit more. It certainly seems like you were very customer centric. You really wanted to understand the why things could or couldn't be done, and sort of challenge that a little bit, and with that sort of think outside the square. But it's my opinion, when you deal with a great salesperson, they make a profound impact to the people that are involved. And unfortunately, in the world of sales, there is a lot of people that don't do that. They're transactional, they're self-driven, they're self-interested, and all that sort of stuff. But when you come across the very best salespeople, and we're in a sales environment, I believe they've got a wonderful place and a role to play. But I mean, what is the trick other than what you've talked about so far when it comes to becoming a great salesperson in your experience?
Yeah, great question. I believe it's down to authenticity and filling the need. And that's what people really need to unpack and pull apart if trying to deliver a solution. It's not a matter of forcing closing techniques and pushing someone into a corner. I think it's important to learn a lot of that, but I learned a lot of my sales techniques from Tom Hopkins in America. He's quite renowned for a book he wrote called Act Like a Lion, Sell Like a Lamb, it was, I believe. So that was very much based on the need. So if I had a client coming in for a meeting and I was due to make a presentation, I already knew she hated the kitchen she was in. She hated the bathrooms in her current house. So I got to understand what she currently had. What was her motivation for wanting to make a change? And how could I best meet that in my solution I would deliver to her? So there was never any of it that was this pressure cooking moment of, you're about to sign, you've got to sign. It was always a natural progression from meeting the need.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic answer, and I couldn't agree more. I think if you're authentic in meeting the needs of the people that are looking at your product in your case, I think that's key. But I think you sort of obviously took that authenticity to a deeper level with anticipating or researching or trying to understand their motives and then tailor the solution to ultimately help them with a product that best meets their needs. And in doing so, and doing the right thing by that individual, you become number one salesperson. So I think that's really, really cool.
Thank you.
You talk about self-awareness, and as an entrepreneur, you sometimes you can be seen as, maybe I think you describe it as rude, or sometimes people might see that as brash or headstrong. How have you sort of developed your own self-awareness, and has there been anyone that really inspires you or has helped you evolve your approach and you as an individual to get the best outcomes?
I think it's been a number of things. I'm a very observant person. And one thing my mentors have told me is that they've enjoyed working with me because I adapt and I learn. And I've got no ego in the game. I'm not interested in being right all the time. And I think that's so important. In construction, we see a lot of egos. We see a lot of people going, that's just the way it's done, and move out of the road, and they get really quite abrupt when you challenge that. But for me, it was about getting all ego out of the way. And trauma actually makes you challenge the way you think. It makes you go, is that right? Should I be looking at a different way? And a lot of it boils down to questioning yourself, Sean, and that's a very important thing in any success, is walking the path, but then having the self-awareness to step back and go, what did I learn from that? How could I do that better? And I've got books from when I was at Metricon every day that I would write in that says, this is what I learned. This is what I want to improve on. And these are the outcomes that I got. And then I'd adapt that into my next day's work. So it really boils down to questioning yourself, because I actually had an old manager that said to me, Tamika, you don't have to be right to be rich. And that stuck with me, because whilst my motivations weren't money, it was a matter of saying, who cares if he's right? Let him be right. But you take your self-awareness and you arrive at a solution. I think that's really important in today's day and age. And a lot of people are waking up to see that too, Sean, which is the great thing. A lot of people are going, we don't need the gold stars on our charts. We really just want to be able to improve and be the best person that we can each and every day. Because the reality is we're not here for a long time. The average life expectancy is, 80 years, but we get hit by a car tomorrow. So why would we want to half do life? Why not be the best that we can?
Now, I love that mantra of being the best that you can and getting the most out of every day. Also really like the fact that you're observant, or put another way, inquisitive about maybe how you can evolve and get better as an individual. And of course, I think that's only really possible if you're prepared to sort of put that ego to the side and sort of open your eyes to different viewpoints and learn from that. But I think the other thing that you touched on that I think it's a good thing to note is the daily reflection exercise. I think so often we just go through life and a year passes, time passes, and you're not really conscious of, what you've achieved or what you need to work on or what worked well or what didn't work well. So I think that daily sort of journaling or reflection exercise is a great one just to take stock of that. So good answers there. I guess, maybe we sort of touched on it a little bit, in terms of your upbringing or youth, and maybe that's somewhat of a driver for you. But I mean, what motivates you? Why are you so driven?
I believe it's giving people what I never had. I had a lot of experiences, as I mentioned earlier on, that I just don't want anyone else to experience. And I mentioned the analogy of the ship to the lighthouse, that's exactly what I'm doing. There's many times that as leaders, they show you this heroic person, but we are all trying the best that we can each and every day, and we're not invincible. There's been many times I've walked away from matters that I've been in, from legal matters to people trying to bully me to people standing over me, that I've walked away in tears. And the only way I can justify walking this path, good or bad, is to make it easier for someone else who's coming in. We see young girls and I think to myself, God, you would not want your daughter to walk in the footprints that I have. So if I have to walk this path, then I can justify that by building a bridge to make it easier for somebody else. And that's my pure motivation, is I've been through enough pain and enough trauma that I know that I don't want someone else to feel what I've felt.
Well, I think that's a tremendous motivator, and obviously a very selfless one with that, and no doubt sustaining. I think a lot of people focus on themselves, the material aspects of success and whatnot, but it seems like at the core of it, you're really looking to create better futures or better outcomes for people that maybe you didn't always have. And I guess
exactly.
I think tough times create resilience and learnings and lessons, and obviously you're sharing them. But I mean, it seems like you've no doubt got a track record of success, no doubt, but you've had to bounce back from setbacks and adversity. I mean, can you share anything specific about what you've had to overcome and any tactics or tools or strategies about how you've overcome them?
I think it's when you've lost so much at any point of your life, and I think most of us have been through an experience where we've gone, wow, I didn't see that coming, and now I'm sitting on the ground. How do I build myself up? I would start from the very basic, when I've been in some very dark holes at a young age of going, what made me happy today? It may only be a couple of little things. If things are that hard in your life, it may only be, my dog made me happy. The sun come up today, that made me happy. I got to go for a walk. And a lot of who I am now, Sean, has been built from those really tough experiences. And in particular, last year I had chronic fatigue for 12 months. And in me not being able to walk around the corner, in me having to lay in bed every weekend as a 29-year-old, I was forced to say to myself, who are you now? Who are you now that you can't walk? Who are you now that you don't get to go the whole day without sleeping? Who are you now that you don't have control? And that really forces someone to dig deep and find that person. And once you've found her or him, no one can take that from you. Everything is just a building block on top of that from there. So then you arise as this fearless person that people go, wow, where did you come from? But it's because you've been on the ground or too many times. Once you've been there, there's a quote that says there's a certain nobility that arrives when somebody's knees hit the ground. And that's exactly what comes out. You get to feel your way through the obstacles. One analogy I used to use when I was younger was I just need to be like a ball. The harder you throw a basketball to the floor, the higher it comes back up. So I would often use that analogy. And I had a photo of it. Another thing I had on my desk was a photo of a racehorse, and it would always win just by the nose. So I'd say to myself, I just need to do that little bit more. I think my limits are here, but I just need to do that tiny bit more because it only wins by the nose, and it makes such a big difference.
Yeah, I think you made some really good analogies or points there, and you've used some of those things to drive you. Just picking up on the chronic fatigue piece, how did you arrive at that situation? Was that as a result of just this relentless drive to succeed and work and the passion that consumes you sometimes when you go after some of these things in front of you, and obviously the cause that you're serving in terms of trying to shine a light on some of the talented females that you work with top 100 women, etc. Like, how does that chronic fatigue come about?
Definitely. It's a really good question, because I do think a lot of my motivation up until the last year has been driven by fear. Mm-hmm. If I've been in an environment, which I was from 13, I didn't want to be in, I was running my hardest. And one thing that women in particular struggle with is boundaries to go, I'm allowed to take care of me now. We can be so selfless in our pursuit to give people what we didn't have. And we're only just learning now as women that we're allowed to have boundaries. We're allowed to say no. We're allowed to put ourselves first, and we're allowed to shut the door. I was at a point in my career where top 100 just scaled. I also had social housing, which we started to delve more into, scaling as well. So I would have women phoning me directly going, I've been given your number. There's women living in tents in our town who are 85 years old. Can you help me? And that weighed very heavy on my heart because I was watching everyone around me who just went, again, that's the way it is. And I was like, that's not okay. But one thing I'd learned out of that whole experience is that it is okay to take time for yourself. It is okay to look after you. And I think we really need to move beyond that as women, because we're better people if we can put self-care first. It used to be looked at as selfish. You've got children, you've got businesses. How could you just, put all that aside and take care of yourself? But your business will only grow as much as what you do. So it's so important that you can establish those boundaries, and they're caring boundaries, because often what we do is we don't tell people our boundaries, but then we resent them when they don't comply with them, that we resent people when they've gone too far, but we haven't vocalized what they are. So it was a very big learning curve for me to shift my perspective, shift my motivation from a place of fear to love. And that might sound corny, but there really is that old school, old-fashioned perspective of, I've got you. I've got you on that one bit of detail you've missed. I've caught you out there. And it's such an unhealthy, unsustainable way to live your life. If you can really come from a loving place and treat people the same, it's calm and it's peaceful, and you can build a successful outcome from that perspective.
Yeah, and I think just looking into the answer there, I think if you're driven by love versus fear, it's probably a more sustainable, less taxing driver than the fear.
Yes,
obviously, love being
definitely
more of a positive scenario. But I think, I think it's great that you've got that realisation of self-care. I think too often I've seen as well tremendously successful people, but they just become so consumed by their endeavours that either their personal health or personal relationships outside of that so-called primary endeavour fail or struggle or whatever, and they suffer as a result. And I think if you can sort of make sure that you've got yourself in harmony, as a good friend of mine says, balance is hard, but trying to get a bit of harmony and amongst it all, I think you're better across the board. So I think where we're going in the future, there's more of that. There's less of the old paradigm, the rigid boundaries of what can and can't be done at certain times. I think we can be effective in different ways. So I think that's a great answer on your part.
And I think that's where I feel quite blessed, to be honest, to have that experience quite young. Because, at 29, I got an opportunity to step back and go, where are you running to, Tamika? And I had a nursing home across the road. So it was a real, look in the mirror point in my life, Sean, where I got to go, where are you running to and what are you running from? So I think I feel quite blessed to have that quite young in my life.
Well, yeah, just picking up on that as well. I love the fact that you've turned that perspective of chronic fatigue into a positive and an insightful experience, as opposed to why me, poor me, this isn't fair, I shouldn't have this at 29. So again, you've pivoted that difficult situation into a positive one. I guess my next question is a pretty one. It's a one that's near and dear to my heart, because just recently, my 9-year-old daughter, Sophie, and I have started listening to podcasts, and that's a big driver for me in doing the podcast, is sort of sharing some of these learnings of people that have been successful in life. But I think role models are really important, and no doubt you're a role model for people, and in particular for females. So for my daughter, Sophie, and others, what sort of key messages would you pass on to young girls like Sophie?
Yeah, and look, it's so important that we are looking at this age group, Sean, especially Sophie's age. And that's actually one thing we're building with the top 100 women, is we've started the top 100 girls to encourage them to get on board. I think that previously we had this idea that we shouldn't listen to children. We shouldn't, their voices they're there to be seen and not heard. And I could not disagree more, because we need them to realise they have their own voice. We need them to realise that the leaders that you're watching are just like you, and you have just as much power to do you really well. I think that's so important, for young girls, because I don't know about you, Sean, but I remember growing up and you'd see all these really successful people, and it was a matter of, when you get older, when you get to this point, when you reach to that point, and all that does is subliminally put this concrete idea in our kids' heads that they need to get to a certain point, and then their life can start. Then they can be happy. And I think it's really important that girls can see that they can be exactly as they are. They can be authentic as they are, and they can be whoever they want to be. They can change the world. They can change the scenarios that they're in. But most importantly, they're entitled to do that. They're entitled to have that. I was doing my makeup the other day, and my little niece, she's 4, was watching me, and she's like, "Can I put on makeup too?" And I actually took it all off and said, No, you actually don't need it. You're beautiful as you are. And I think that's one thing that we really need to teach girls, is that if you're walking around, everyone has their own perspective in life, but if you're walking around with a hell of a lot of fillers and Botox, guess what your daughter's going to see? Do we really want our daughters to be growing up in an environment where they feel like they're not enough and they need to look and be a certain way for them to be enough? I think it's so important that we teach these girls at a young age that exactly as you are perfect. As imperfect as you are perfect. I think that's one message that I really would love young girls to know from a very early on, rather than learning the hard way like we had to.
Yeah, I think you make some great points there, in so much as I think as a role model, people around you consciously or unconsciously take on board the way you act and operate. And like you say, if it's not the makeup, then it's the Botox and all the rest. You might not explicitly say that this is what you need to do to be beautiful, but inadvertently, subconsciously, you're sort of setting the example that maybe you have to do that for a reason, and young girls might pick up on that.
Exactly.
But I think the other component of your answer is really just encouraging young girls to be their authentic best self. And you've already got the tools and the potential and all the rest of it. Just believe in that. It's not getting to 18 or 20 or 25. It's not necessarily getting the degree or whatever the case is to make that possible. You just, I guess, inspiring them to become their best version of them, not necessarily of other things or paradigms or examples around them. Believe in themselves and be true to themselves and be their best version of themselves.
Exactly. And we don't want duplicates, right? We don't need one person duplicated across the world. We need different inputs. There's plenty of seats at the table for both women, men, girls, and boys. We need those alternative approaches. And what's interesting is that I presented a social housing strategy to a board just recently that I've been working with for a year or two. And I presented this strategy that I've spent so long putting together. And for so long, it didn't make sense to me why I felt like I never fitted in so many places. And this 80-year-old woman on the board said to me, we have never had a perspective like this. This can solve so many problems with what you've come up with. And it's like nothing we've ever seen before. She said, Tamika, we've sat with high-level executives and large corporations who've never had this perspective. I love it. It's great. And what that said to me, not saying it from an ego place, but what that said to me is I was always meant to be me. I was never meant to be you. I was never meant to follow the path that you set out for me to do. I was meant to follow my own. And that has already, I'm thankful, but that has already shown me that was part of my purpose, was to walk an unusual path, was to come up with something different, have different perspectives, and hopefully that in turn is what will really help people.
No, I think you've obviously got the courage and belief to sort of be your authentic self, and I think that's important. And I think it's taxing when you're not your authentic self, when you're trying to be something that's not who you are at your own core. That's taxing, and equally when you are your authentic self, I think that's tremendously energizing.
It is.
So it seems like you've definitely done it, coming at it from a different angle rather than subscribe to typical paradigms. So that's obviously worked in yours and other people's advantage. But I always find it interesting with people that are successful as to what are their habits or rituals to get the most out of themselves or their days. I'd be interested to sort of understand from your perspective, is there anything you do on a regular basis to get the best out of yourself or the best out of your days?
I think last year in having chronic fatigue, one of the habits that I did learn was meditation, because I couldn't control anything that was happening around me physically. So I really had to learn the art of letting go. And I think that's imperative to anyone's success, to learn meditation, but not just to learn meditation, but to learn the art of letting go every day, to be able to stay sane, to be able to be happy, to be able to live a life. So I'm a big person, a big believer in meditation, also exercise, and I'm pretty clean now with my diet after being sick for a while there. So my habits would be meditation, self-development in some way, reading, and taking time out for yourself. We've discussed this previously, Sean, that it's important that you can take a backward perspective, and that means not glorifying busy. There's so many people who walk around and go, I'm so busy, as if, you're going to get a gold star at the end of your day for being the busiest person. But taking that step back allows you to have that perspective of where you're going. So those three things I'd say are pretty important for my everyday, success or progress, you would call it.
Yeah, no, I think you made some great points. I too really enjoy meditation and exercise, and I think meditation is probably something that's gaining more and more momentum. Justin Langer referred it on to me, and in the beginning I sort of thought, I don't know about this, but now I do it. It's sort of hard to imagine life without it. And also Tim Ferriss, the podcaster and author who's written many books and all the rest of it, he wrote a book, The Tools of Titans, and one of the recurring themes of some of the most successful people in all walks of life is meditation. So I think it's something people should grapple more and more. So you're right, it's a fantastic book. And I guess a bit of a curveball. What can you tell us about the merits of carrying rose quartz in your pocket when you go to meetings or undertake things? My research tells me that this may be a strategy. So that's my curveball question for today.
That's funny. Okay, that was definitely a curveball. I didn't see that one coming. I think it's stemming down to it definitely stems down to coming from a place of love. And I know that sounds some people, I probably would have heard that 5 or 6 years ago and gone off, what a wank, excuse my language, but whatever. But it really is important. If you can approach people from a level of compassion, then you assume the best. You can still have your eyes entirely open to see things and observe things, but you can assume the best. Someone might get angry at you and you can respond from your ego or react, or you could step back and go, I can see they're actually having a really hard time in business. They're having a hard time at home. There's something going on in their lives, and not taking that personally. So that way I can respond in an appropriate way to not take it personally, to not have an argument and exhaust my energy for the sake of it, with no real outcome. It's just a matter of approaching things in a loving way that says, that's okay. We've all had that feeling of you've drafted something and you've done it absolutely perfect, and someone's caught you on that one thing you didn't do. And it's a terrible feeling. We can approach things in a way that says, that's brilliant. So moving forward, perhaps look at this one item we just overlooked, but apart from that, that's great. So it's about putting yourself out of the way to have empathy and to have compassion, to really believe that you're allowed to be kind, and you can be successful in doing so. For so long in my life, I've been dealt with so many hard experiences, and I worked really hard to remain kind, to remain the person that I am, when the rest of the world kept saying to me, you can't show your kindness, you can't, it'll be considered as weakness, you can't do that, you've got to be tough. And I thought, no, I don't want to lose myself. So it's a really brave thing to step out and say, this is all who I am. This is all of who I am, and I'm kind, and I want to approach things in a loving way, but I will not be walked on. So that's a bit of the background behind that.
No, I think it's a great answer, and obviously it's a conscious reminder of all of that. And obviously, whilst you demonstrate strengths and you won't be walked over, I do like that compassion and empathy. I think when you see people behave in a way that the younger version of you might have thought, right, I'm going to go into battle with that point of view, moving that to a perspective.
Yes.
Actually, if they're behaving and acting that way, that they're obviously not maybe great themselves, or there's something else at play here. Therefore, I'll have a level of empathy for how they're acting and behaving, as opposed to feeling like I need to challenge that and sort of looking through that behaviour a little bit. So I too practice that a little bit, and good on you for continuing that sort of mantra of kindness.
Look, Sean, sorry, I was just going to say, people are going to disappoint you. People are going to hurt you, and that's inevitable. Mm-hmm. But you can still choose to see that from a different perspective. There's been many people that have let me down in my life, and I could still take a backward step and go, I want to give you the opportunity to make the right decision. And if you don't, I know myself well enough that I can walk away without taking that personally, because that's a decision that you've made. So it's important to remember that.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned earlier about the importance of letting go. I see too many people that carry the baggage of their past, and they've got all this resentment and hang-ups about what happened in the past, and it just weighs them down. It doesn't – carrying that around in that so-called metaphorical backpack that you carry around just weighs you down. It doesn't make life any easier. It doesn't serve you in any positive way. It doesn't mean that you become
exactly
that, like you said, but there is no value in hanging on to something. You move on from it, you learn from it, you accept it, but just hanging on to it, just you can see it in people's faces. They're just sort of weighed down, they're hard, they're resentful, and that holding on to all that stuff doesn't help them. So I think you make a great point in that regard as well. But we've talked a lot about getting better as a person, as a leader, as a business owner, and you also refer to books being something, and mentors. I mean, how do you sort of get better on any of those fronts? And is there any sort of key books or aspects you can leave the listeners with that others might be able to sort of consume or take stock of?
One of my favourite books was it's actually called The Power of Love. And it talks about the two clear perspectives that you can take from fear or from love. And it really helps you to have that observer's bird's eye, I guess, to see that in your everyday life. So rather than emotionally reacting, all of a sudden you get to recognize those patterns to go, okay, well, they're acting from fear. They're scared. So you don't take it personally anymore. Suddenly someone's screaming at you, which, gosh, I've had that a few times in construction. People just start screaming, and I'm quite good now at remaining calm because I think they're scared. They actually think that I'm doing the wrong thing here, but I'm not. So I'm just going to wait for them to stop yelling, and then I'm going to clearly make it clear to them that that's not my intentions. So it really takes the emotion out of it. Energy is something that we only have a small amount of energy every day. And this is what chronic fatigue taught me, is that I'd get into an argument and I'd be exhausted. I'd listen to something I didn't want to listen to, or I'd do something I didn't want to, and I'd be tired. So I really got to understand that give and take mentality, that you need to meet in the middle. Otherwise, it's exhausting. If you go over that line, like my acupuncturist used to say, you're already overexpending your energy. But The Power of Love was a book that was really important to me in seeing that from that perspective. I love Tools of the Titans, like you mentioned. I thought that was a really good book to be able to recap the success of people. I thought the Kerry Packer book was quite an interesting one, but very, very intelligent man. Sure, I think of some other favourite books. And Seeking the Sacred, would be my other favourite book. That's a really good one on compassion.
Yeah. I too have read Tools of Titans and Kerry Packer. I assume you're looking at the book, referring to the book, The Rise and Rise of Kerry Packer. And sort of,
yes,
so it's an interesting insight and account into his upbringing, success, and methodologies, I think there's some insights on both sides of that coin, but no doubt achieved an incredible light and changed the game on so many different fronts. But the last book you mentioned, what's the sort of short summary of the premise of that book?
Seeking the Sacred is about compassion. It really is about delving into who you are as a person, because it makes you question. It makes you question everything. It makes you question, why you're doing things the way you are, and also that there is no real harm in approaching things in a kind way. Often we approach in a reactive way because we are too fearful. However, if someone questions you and says, "What are you scared of?" it really gives you a chance to ask yourself, well, what is it that I'm scared of? Am I scared I'm going to be dominated? Am I scared that I'm going to lose and look silly? So it really makes you question a lot of those things, which is why I love that book.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I think there's some great books for people to follow up on in that regard. And also, I think you mentioned earlier as well, mentors or seeking out different people to sort of either observe or become inquisitive or ask questions of those that have arguably achieved success. But mentors have been something you've used over time as well?
I have, and I think it's important that you commit to a mentor. There's a lot of people that are very time poor that have given me their time because they've seen that every bit of advice they've given me, I've taken away, I've researched, and I've come back. I'd go to sales meetings and the manager would mention 3 books and I'd come back and I'd go, yep, I've read them. I'm ready to go. What else can you give me? So it's mentors who are extremely busy like we all are will give you their time if they know that you're giving 100%. But in doing the courses that I have on brain science, which was an interesting one, it actually talks about how if we're emotional, that line cuts straight through the logical part of our brain. So we can't think logically. So if you're having an emotional experience or someone's wound you up, you can either ask yourself a series of questions to get yourself to think logical, or mentors are great because they can pick up the phone and talk to you and just ask you a couple of questions. And then it's factual. And then you get out of that experience going, oh, okay, probably wasn't that big of a deal. So it's the perspectives, it's the foresight. And a good mentor shouldn't sit there and say, when you get to my point, I'm so much better than you. So when you get here, a good mentor should guide you in questions and getting you to find those answers yourself. And that can be hard because you want to just tell people the path. However, if you're questioning someone, it allows them to arrive at their own conclusions, which they need to. Because if they're anything like me, they're probably going to learn the hard way because they have to walk and then go, crap, that hurt. I won't do that again. So it's important to have mentors, but even more so important to have mentors who don't take the power away from you in saying that I'm this righteous person up here. Having a mentor that's reachable, that's teachable is important.
Now, well, I love your drive to get better on a number of fronts, and obviously that's something that you're passionate about, becoming the best version of your own self as well, and I think that takes commitment, which is great. But obviously through the podcast, we've established that you've achieved an awful lot already at a young age. But, what can you sort of share in terms of your vision or dream of the future? I mean, as you sort of look out over the next 5, 10, 15 or so years, what sort of drives or motivates you in that regard?
I think the picture I see is the Top 100. We're building a member platform there to be able to help and connect women all over the world. So that'll be a big part of my future, is building that. I'm also starting to get asked for a number of speaking engagements and things like that, which, we're tying into the awareness of the Top 100. But a large part of what I feel that I will be doing is in social housing. So both Top 100 and social housing are very similar in the sense that we're creating pathways for people to make better decisions for themselves. So I feel that will be, I'm reluctant sometimes to go, this is where I'm going, because I know life throws curveballs at you. And if you're such a visionary, which I was, it can be really difficult to let that go, because life's like, you're over here and you're going, no, I was going there. Like, no. So it's important that you can adapt constantly. But I would say my future would be building the Top 100 women to where it needs to be, and in further rolling out the social housing strategy, which I'm really excited to do. So that can help people, because you got to remember, women have come a long way in a short period of time. What drives me in the social housing, to answer your question, Sean, is my grandmothers. On one side, I had a grandmother who was physically abused, so much to the point that my father's partially deaf because he was beaten so bad as a child. On the other hand, I had a grandmother who was raped, had a child, and that child was adopted out. Because in that day, they didn't talk about things. Everyone wants to perceive this perfect image. No one talks about things. We've got a voice now as women and as girls, and I think that's powerful. We've got something that these women didn't have. And particularly in the social housing, a lot of people don't realise the majority of people who are homeless or in need of a home are actually our grandmothers. They're not the drug addicts that you want to perceive and stereotype. They're women who didn't work, who had children, who raised children, whose husbands have left or passed away. And now they're in a position going, I don't know how to bring in money. What do I do now? I'm not skilled enough. No one's going to employ me. And they're the ones who are left suffering. So my big driving factor is in helping that, because we can. Not because we should or anything like that, but because we can.
Well, I think you're definitely well on your way to leaving a really strong and positive legacy in terms of some of those endeavours that really drive you, and obviously the businesses that you've founded to support that endeavour. So really congratulate you on that sort of side of it. But I guess just in sort of concluding, and conscious of your time, obviously you're very busy, but if I was to give you this magic phone, if you could somehow call the 15-year-old version of yourself, what piece of advice would you pass on to that young lady at that stage of her life? What wisdom would you share?
I think I'd say what my grandfather used to always say to me, and he was quite a big role model in my life before he passed away at 5. He was in Stockman's Hall of Fame, and he used to always say, he used to call me little old lady, and he'd say, stay in the goddamn saddle. So I think that would be my advice back then, because you look back and you think, God, you have no idea what's coming.
Yep.
You have no idea what's ahead of you, sweetheart.
Yep.
So it's I would say it's worth it. Keep going. It doesn't make sense right now, but it will. So keep going. Don't compare your story to anyone else's, because it won't make any sense. But keep going. stay in the saddle and take a leap of faith, knowing that everything you are going through will one day make sense.
Well, fantastic. Well, look, I think you've shared so many key takeaways today. It's been super interesting chatting with you on that sort of front. I've taken a bunch of notes myself, and I've got no doubt that those that listen to the podcast will be inspired and no doubt get plenty of takeaways. So, thanks so much for taking the time to join us, Tamika. You're doing some wonderful work right across the board, and no doubt your endeavours are going to continue to grow and become more apparent and visible. So really appreciate you taking the time to join us and share those aspects today on the podcast show, and all the very best for continuation of your legacy that you're leaving behind you.
Thanks, Sean. I really appreciate you having me.
Thanks so much for listening in today, guys. As we talked about at the top of the show, I hope you really got some good takeaways out of that. I know I personally have. Look forward to further podcasts. The next one we're going to release is a rebadged version and a relaunch of Richie McCaw. Incredible individual, remarkable way that he's approached his career in football, but there's so many transferable things into all aspects of life. So I'm really excited about posting that. It's one of our most listened to podcasts and inspirational podcasts. So that's our next one. Thanks again for joining us. Cheers.